This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! It's gone! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
What a win! Let's see how the Sunday, bro.
Porque says cheated!
What was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Carr wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today for this deeper dive into the Sounders' newest acquisition of Jesus Ferreira, and we'll also touch on the Paul Arriola situation, is Steve Davis. This is a name that hopefully you will recognize. He is a former colleague of mine at SB Nation, but more recently and relevantly, he has been a TV broadcaster for FC Dallas. He still is the color analyst for their radio broadcasts. He writes for Soccer America. Steve Davis, one of the oldest and best names in American soccer coverage. Thank you for joining us on the show, Steve.
Hey, nice introduction, Jeremiah. And I now know how to pronounce your last name as well, because of course I've seen it for years and years,
Yeah.
but I don't know that I was ever really clear on it. So that's just a little
That's
something
pretty
else
common.
I've added to my bank of knowledge. O'Shan, yeah,
and
okay.
I was pretty confident in the pronunciation of your name, but
right. Okay,
but
that's
I'm
a low
glad-
bar, my man. That's a low bar.
it's a low bar. But thank you
Good to
for
be
doing
here,
this,
man.
Steve. The Jesus Ferreira trade is now completed in full. Disclosure, we are recording this before that has been formally announced, but we are, I think, on good footing here with what we're going to be talking about. As we're recording this, the Paul Arriola deal is still not finalized as far as I know, but we'll get into that a little bit. So that's a little disclosure for you, the listener. But Steve, I think on paper, you look at this Jesus Ferreira deal, and I think from a Sounders perspective, you're going, wow, this is great. They're getting a 24-year-old who has scored, he's got more goals than any player of his age in MLS history. He's got 53 goals through 24 games. He's got to 50 goal or through his age 23 season. He's barely just turned 24. He's the fastest player to 50 goals in MLS history, or the youngest player, I should say, to 50 goals in MLS history. This is he was a designated player with Dallas. He's coming to the Sounders as not a designated player. This is not something you see, especially at this age. It on one hand, it's very exciting, but there clearly is some other part to this story. And I've heard rumors of this, and I wanted to mainly bring you in to kind of give us a little bit more sense of how does Jesus Ferreira go from being the poster child of FC Dallas and really of the whole MLS homegrown system to, moving across the country and playing in Seattle at a pay cut?
Yeah, no, look, it's a fair question. It's a good question. And, the answers are forthcoming. But what I will say is it starts with sort of the simplest notion in sports, something that you and I have, talked about and listened to since we were kids, which is 4 words: time for a change. It's sometimes it really is that simple. With Jesus, it's been really interesting because he was a talented player. He still is a talented player. He's a smart player. He understands the game. He reads the game. Back in Jeremiah, back in like 2018 or something like that, when the guy was 16, 17 years old. I just remember watching him practice and just telling people when he was barely playing, just telling people he's the best finisher on the team. It's funny because right now people don't see him as a great finisher. It may be a good finisher, but they see him as something more recessed in the tactical alignment. But he is a very good finisher, and he just has a world of talent. Now, here's the thing: the talent was sort of it was flourishing. It was at its peak in 2022, and when he almost set the team record for goals, and was bitterly disappointed in the last game to not have accomplished that. He really wanted that. He was driven by it. And then the next year, 2023, he started really really well. And then something happened, man, and I'm not sure what. He was coming off the World Cup where he started, for the United States in an elimination game. Then
Yep.
he went to the United States national team in that summer, and as he came back, I don't know, something had happened. It was hard to recognize. It was impossible to recognize at the time because you didn't know it. But as you watched him for the rest of the year, you started asking yourself and asking him, is he carrying an injury? And he wasn't saying anything about it, but maybe he was. And then, 2024, it just wasn't his year in a number of different ways. He was carrying some injury. And what I saw, though, Jeremiah, was just a player who when he lacks confidence, he only wants the ball in kind of comfortable spots. And that's not uncommon for soccer players. But at some point, it's ineffective. He can still, he'd sort of drift out to the right. He wouldn't stay high, drift out to the right, play make from that sort of, area right side, 40, 45, 30 yards out, something. And he can hit a good ball in there, but at some point that becomes predictable. So, the answer to your question is just, is Seattle right now, here's the bottom line, is Seattle right now getting 2022 version of Jesus Ferreira, or are they getting more 2024 version of Jesus Ferreira, or are they getting a guy they can at least get back to 2022 version? And you got a great coach there, and you got a great staff, and you got there's a good culture there. So I have confidence that he can be that player again. The problem is just with FC Dallas last year, he just wasn't. And I think it was just a good time for a change for all parties.
Yeah, you look at his numbers, and you sort of alluded to this pretty directly, but you go from 2022 through the Gold Cup of 2023. And at the Gold Cup, if people go back in their mind and they remember the Gold Cup, it was sort of a roller coaster ride in a lot of ways, specifically for Ferreira, because he scored a bunch of goals in that tournament, but it was against sort of lesser opponents. And the U.S. ended up going out in I think they lost. They went out to Panama, I believe. It was the worst performance in a Gold Cup in maybe ever, but certainly in at least a generation or two of U.S. national. And Ferreira sort of became the poster child for what went wrong with that team, because I think he scored 6 goals in that tournament. He has it's crazy. He has an amazing goal scoring record with the U.S. He has 15 goals in 23 U.S. national team appearances. He's like the 11th best scorer in U.S. national team history. And this is a player who I think most national team fans see as like a persona non grata almost with the national team, which is the Sounders are sort of collecting those types of players in between Jordan Morris and Christian Roldan and potentially Paul Areola. But it is a funny little dynamic where, he played about as well as you could play over an 18-month period for both club and country. And then in the last 18 months, it's been a very different player. I mean, he only scored a couple goals that season at the tail end of 2023. And then, he had 5 goals last year for Dallas with, I guess, 6 assists, MLS assists. But he was just not the same player. But then you go back and you watch these, like we've been passing around this 50 video, the video they made from his 50 goals. And it's like, this is an amazing player. He's finishing from all over the park. He like one of the plays that sort of stands out in my mind is he had a free kick that he sort of took where who was it? Maybe against RSL, where they were not ready for him to take it, but it just shows an intelligence of being aware of the situation and just taking this free kick from a not particularly easy place, but placing it perfectly, but against a defense that wasn't set. And it's just sort of like the thinking that it takes to even attempt that play.
No, you're right. His soccer brain is elite. His skill level is elite. That player you mentioned with all the goals, you know, it's in there somewhere. You know,
Right.
he didn't forget how to play. You know, you mentioned the goal against RSL. There was another one sort of similar back in it was probably Jeremiah. I think it was 22. Sort of similar against LAFC.
Mhm.
You know, where he catches a goalkeeper oh gosh, maybe it was LA Galaxy. It's one of the LA teams out there
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Southern California, and you know, caught the goalkeeper kind of napping. Look, it's all in there. I watched that same clip of 50 goals, and I forgot how many of them were on really intelligent, well-timed runs. Because over
Mhm.
the last, as I told you, as he's gotten to this place where he just wants the ball in more comfortable spots, I think he stopped and because he was playing further back in the formation, you know, he stopped making as many of those runs. But I forgot how doggone good he was at it. If you look at a couple of those goals in that clip, what it also demonstrates is he's a really good and willing pressing striker. You
Mm.
know, and to go play for Brian Schmetzer, you know, and the pressing and to recognize the pressing cues, which he can, and to have the willingness to put the work in, which he does. All the ingredients are there. Some of it, I sort of wonder, is it because, look, he was playing for a national team that was, you know, we don't need to relitigate all the national team issues, you know, under Berhalter, but he's also playing for FC Dallas, a team that was having its own struggles. So now, you know, both of his teams are struggling. You know, I think he wants to win. You know, he's got that in him. He's got that competitive spirit. So maybe he was putting a lot on him. You know, as you and I were talking a while ago, you're alluding to some things you've heard about, you know, teams. You know, they were done with him. He was done with him. See, I don't know that I really see it that way.
Mm.
You know, some of the body language, you know, you could talk about on the field with Jesus, but I think he was a pretty good teammate. He was always willing to step up for his teammates. You know, he's a little bit of a difficult character to read, and that he's always a little guarded. Which makes him a little unapproachable in ways, and I sort of wish he would soften the edges on that a little bit, because I think you know, look, it's just culture. It's just the way we are as people. You know, if you reveal a little bit more of yourself and make yourself a little more vulnerable, people are just willing to give you more of a chance. You know, and they're just willing to to ride with you a little bit through the tough times. So I guess with Jesus, the other thing I would say is, and I've been saying this for I don't know 2 or 3 years, watching him at FC Dallas. I always said that Jesus has a decision to make. He is a good soccer player. He's going to be a good soccer player. He's one of these guys that at 80%, he's going to be better than a lot of people at 100%. So what I've always said is he has a decision. Does he want to be a good soccer player, or does he want to be special? If he wants to be special, you know, he's got to do a little bit more in terms of probably keeping his body in the right place, because he's got a
Mm.
little bit of a history of injury now. I'm not saying he's not doing enough, but I'm saying special is special. You got to do a little bit more. Can you integrate yourself a little bit more within the tactical system? You know, I've seen Seattle under Brian Schmetzer for years. He's going to have to. You know, if he
Right.
doesn't, he's not going to play. You know, so he's going to have to. And I think it's a good move for him in those ways. You guys have such a good culture there. I love watching Seattle play, because every game I can just see the culture, if that makes any sense. And you know, sometimes
Yeah.
it's better than others, but I can see it at work. And you know, now he's going to a place where he's not going to be the leader as he was here. He's got to fit in there. It's like a dog in a pack. He's
Mhm.
not going to come in as a pack leader. He's got to fit into the pack, and I think that's good for him, because again, he's got that choice to make. You want to be good, you're there. You're okay. You know, you can be done right now, and you'll have a good career. Or do you want to be special? And that's what he's got to figure out.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I just went back. I looked at his 2023 Gold Cup. He had 7 goals in 5 games, and back-to-back hat tricks. In my mind, I was thinking he was very good in that tournament, but including he had the only goal for the U.S. in the game they were eliminated against in Panama. But to your point, it is. I think you're right. I think that, this is a team that, Albert Rusnak came into in 2022, where he was sort of used to being the guy at RSL, and he was just sort of one of the guys when he came into Seattle. He was asked to sort of play a different role than he had played before, with the idea, kind of under similar circumstances, where they were going into CONCACAF Champions League, and they sort of said, we have a role for you to play, and we need you to play that role, and he did it well, and then he sort of got integrated, and then he had this big breakout season last year. And I do kind of wonder if that's a similar messaging that they're going to use with Ferreira, where, he is clearly not going to be, no one's going to be looking to Ferreira to be the leader. This is a team, Stefan Fry is a leader here. Albert Rusnak is now a leader here. Even guys like Jordan Morris and Christian Roldan. And you've got a nice mix of Spanish. I realize obviously he's an English speaking American, but he's one of these players like Christian Roldan who can sort of, or Alex Roldan for that matter, who can sort of exist in both worlds of the Spanish speaking players and the English speaking players.
100%.
And I do think it's this kind of nice environment where there are a mix of old guys and young guys. You have locals, and you have just similar to Dallas, where you have all these homegrown players. But you've sort of got this. I think one of the things that the Sounders have done a good job of over the years is of sort of like balancing the idea that we are a Seattle team, but we bring, we sort of embrace stars from elsewhere without, for whatever reason, Seattle has never really been known as this mecca of homegrown talent the way that Dallas sort of has been. But if you look at the numbers, the number of players who played significant roles who came through the Sounders Academy on the Sounders last year is as high as anyone, might have been the highest in the league. And yeah, I do think that it's going to be an interesting dynamic, especially that he has an existing relationship, presumably with Jordan Morris, with Christian Roldan, potentially with Paul Arriola. So I'm really excited to see what he does here. And I sort of look across the rest of the league, and maybe I'm looking through this with rave green glasses, but I look at, Austin just paid $10 million to sign Brandon Vasquez, and you compare his scoring record, and admittedly that includes some time in Liga MX, but you compare him to Jesus Ferreira, and these are very similar players. The difference being that Ferreira is 2 years younger and didn't cost $10 million to bring in.
No, you're right. And look, obviously, there's some other things you sort of have to weigh into all that calculus, fit within the system and things like that. And another one is contract. Where is his contract? What does he want next? I don't want to say this wrong, but I believe he signed through 25. So you could potentially.
I think that they're signing him to a new deal as part of this trade. Is that my understanding is that he's guaranteed at least through 27 now.
Okay, well, so you take that off the table as a factor there. I think it's one of these things. Sometimes you look at a trade and you say, well, that team got the better, or this team got the better, and sometimes you look at them, and say, let's wait 2 to 3 years, and then I'll tell you about who got the better of this trade, because you have to look at how things sort of play out. And then sometimes you look at it and say, I don't know, Dallas is sitting on a pile of guaranteed allocation money. They got an international spot. Leo Chu's got something.
Oh, I think Leo Chu is not nothing in this trade for you guys.
Right. That's right. But Seattle gets something if they can get that. If they can get U.S. national team starter and elimination game Jesus Ferreira, then both sides get something really good out of it, I believe.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly I'm hopeful with that. There's two elements of this that I also was curious your take on, that I've heard kind of come up repeatedly as sort of flashpoints in the Dallas Ferreira relationship. The first one, I suppose, is the transfer that fell through last year, where he was supposed to go to Spartak Moscow, and this isn't Dallas. This is MLS came in and probably rightfully said we're not comfortable doing business with Russia, who is under all sorts of international sanctions. We're not sure if this is a legal move, but in either way, I think it was I would imagine pretty frustrating for Ferreira that he thought he was getting his big move to Europe, even if Spartak Moscow is not what most people think of as moving to Europe, but they whatever.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that there was some emotional letdown, because it did seem like the deal that he signed with Dallas in 2022 was sort of structured with the idea that he would be leaving before he counted as a full DP, which would have started this year, I guess.
So, look, I don't want to speak out of place here. I never got the sense that he was, ferociously frustrated with that.
Okay.
Because, look, Spartak Moscow, I mean, as you said, you're not exactly talking about moving to Chelsea, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's sort of, look, it's at a time when there's I think the Brittany Griner thing was still going on.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know if she's been back yet. So it's almost like you look at that thing, and he's just, look, Jesus is a smart guy, right? And I just think that there's a part of him that I'm sure looked at that and said, yeah, all right, if I'm not going there, that's cool, because maybe I didn't want that anyway. And the other thing is, he's not one of these guys. There have been plenty of guys that have come through the FC Dallas Academy, and as they get signed to a pro deal, their next thought isn't, "Whew, that's great. Now I can play for the shirt in the stadium."
Mm-hmm.
Their next thought is, "Whew, now I can go to Europe."
Right.
And I don't think Jesus was that guy. I think it was always in the back of his mind. And as he got a little older,
he played in a long time in Dallas
because he wanted to. And he said all along, going way back, he said, "I want to do what my dad couldn't do, which is win a championship for this club." He was not a guy who was hell bent to go for Europe, to go to Europe. So when that opportunity came up, okay, yeah, he gets to go to Europe. But I look, and again, I'm not inside. He and I aren't sitting around playing video games talking about this stuff, on a
right.
Thursday night, right? So I don't want to lie about it, but I just don't get the feeling that was, something that made him sulk around about. Okay. I just don't think that was the deal. I could be wrong, but I don't.
I mean, I find that frankly a little real. Like, I know there was a lot of people. This has come up more than once in our community of saying, I don't know, if you really wanted to go to Russia in 2023, I'm a little worried about this guy, but maybe you're right. I mean, I would love this version of the truth to be the correct version, because it is comforting, frankly, that to some level, because I think you're right. There is a lot of evidence that he is not a player who was solely focused on going to Europe, or
right.
else he wouldn't have signed the contracts. I mean, he signed 2 or 3 contracts with Dallas over the years. He clearly could have forced his way out somewhere. I mean, it's not that hard. Like, as you've seen numerous times, it's not that hard for Dallas to move a player to Europe if the goal is just to get to Europe. They have done it as well as anyone.
100%. I probably look at somebody more like Jordan Morris. I think if Jordan Morris would have had, a great deal at some point along the way, but it just he was happy enough there, and nobody's talking about Jordan Morris being pissed off because he hasn't gone to Europe. I don't think anyway. You could tell me.
No, you're right. You're totally right.
But the other thing about Jesus is his father. It wasn't that long ago that his father quit playing professionally. Okay, down in Colombia. So there was a long time when Jesus for his family, he was kind of the man of the house. He had, at 16, 17 years old, he kind of
interesting.
had to
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so, so for him to be here and sort of be the major breadwinner of the family. I don't know what his dad was making, playing in the lower levels of Columbia.
Probably
as
not what he was
into,
making.
right, exactly. And so I think that was also incentive for him to stay here and not be again one of these guys that was
Interesting.
Just, if I don't go to Europe this year, I'm gonna be mad about it. I just don't think that was him. I think he's level headed enough to understand that Major League Soccer in 2024 is a pretty darn good place, and now he's going to a club with a winning history and great fans, and I think he understands all that. Does he probably want to go to? Well, in fact, I've heard him say, yeah, you'd like to go to Europe someday, but that's how he says it. Yeah, I'd like to go there someday. He doesn't say, man, I can't wait to get there, and I don't want to be here anymore.
Well, I got to say, I just looked this up. I did not realize that David Ferreira was playing professionally until 2019.
Yep.
So I mean, that's
yep.
That's pretty wild.
He's playing, in Colombia, and who knows what kind of role he has on what
but
team.
he was on a professional contract.
Sure, that's right.
But anyway, the other flashpoint that I've sort of heard bandied about that maybe led to sort of hastened his that contributed maybe to some potential frustrations was Dallas signing Peter Musa last year to be a number 9, which was, Ferreira had played as you'll know better than me, but my understanding is Ferreira had kind of been the number 9 for during his most productive seasons at Dallas. And then Dallas brings in Peter Musa, who is clearly a number 9, a very good player, it should be said. And this is also where it's sort of similar to Jordan Morris, where I would imagine, the Sounders would have loved to sign a Peter Musa, but Jordan Morris has been a pretty effective number 9, and it was kind of, I don't know, how did he sort of, from your perspective, how much did the Peter Musa thing, whether it was emotional or just from a statistic, from an analytics or tactical perspective, I guess is the word I was looking for, did that affect Ferreira's effectiveness?
So I don't think Jesus is a guy. He was never really a classic 9. He really liked to drop back. He wanted to play a little further. I honestly, I think if you think about the way like Sebastian Driussi played for Austin at his best, when he was sort of listed as an attacking midfielder, but he was in the box an awful lot.
Right.
And he knew how to arrive in the box, and
probably
and
like a Clint Dempsey as well.
Yeah, that's another good one. Another guy. He's hard to define. So the fact that he wasn't going to be, the high striker, I think he was fine with that. I think he likes playing in the half spaces. And in fact, I know he does. That's sort of where he wants to be. He enjoys creating just as much as he does scoring. And because he's got talent, because he's got will, because he's got the big soccer brain, he can do a lot of things. He can play as a 10. He can play as a he can play as a 9. He can play as sort of a 9.5. That's what Nico Estevez used to always call him. He's like, yeah, he's not a 9, he's not a 10, he's kind of a 9.5. You know, so I don't really think that. In fact, what I would say is that the club's willingness to go out and spend on somebody like Peter Musa, not only showing some willingness to spend a little bit for the roster, but also taking a little bit of pressure off of Jesus to score all the doggone goals. I think that he rather liked that part. Now you get to December of 2024 as Eric Quill comes in, and I sort of wrote this I sort of wrote this for the Substack that I sometimes write for Texas 11. That Eric had a decision to make. He was going to have to, between Peter Musa and his skill set, Alan Velasco and his skill set, and Jesus Ferreira and his skill set. You really couldn't build your attack around all 3 of them because they're just not exactly complementary parts. 2 of them, you could probably pick any 2 and create, a system where they are complementary parts, but probably not all 3. Now you're square peg round hole kind of, hammering. And I said, I think one of them has to. It's probably going to have to go or take some sort of a lesser role. And that's just somewhere in here. That's something else to consider. That maybe Eric Quill just looked at it and along with the technical staff and said, it's not going to be Peter Musa because they paid a lot of money for him. It's probably not going to be Alan Velasco uh, because he's coming off the injury. They still think his value is really high. It just sort of fits in the club model of buying young internationally and maybe selling on. It just made sense in a lot of ways that it was going to have to be Jesus, and so they looks to me like they went out and got a deal that that again everybody can kind of benefit from. I don't think I asked you your
it'll be
question, but I
interesting
don't
to
even
see how
remember what your
how
question was.
no, that is
I don't.
kind of the question. I think that is
Yeah.
sort of the question that it wasn't. I mean, it does answer the question. I think it also sets up an interesting conundrum for Brian Schmetzer because I do
Mm.
think it's on paper a similar. He's got some similar issues here. I guess maybe the difference is that the Sounders are probably going to play like 45 or 50 games this year, and they're going to have to be rotating a lot. And one where that whether or not Jesus Ferreira is the number 9 when they are playing their most important games, or if he's playing something else, there's probably a place for him on the field, and so maybe that sort of works it out a little easier, just because the Sounders have so many games to play this year. But before we go, I wanted to ask you real quickly about Paul Arriola. He is, it looks, from what I can tell, it looks like that deal is going to happen. We still don't have official word on it yet. But just real broadly, everyone I've talked to seems to just rave about the character of Paul Arriola and sort of, what he brings on the field. I don't know. I look at his numbers. I'm still a little confused why what was so bad. I mean, he was for a player who was asked to play a lot of different positions last year. By my count, he had to play 6 different positions. He started at 6 different positions last year. Played a lot of wing back, played a fair amount of fullback, all up and down the field. I don't know what can you say about Paul Arriola?
A lot of what you said is accurate. I don't think anybody looks at Paul, and I don't think they're terribly upset with the performance level last year. Eric Quill is a guy who's going to demand a lot of effort. Paul Arriola is a guy who is never short of it. I don't think that's a problem. I think the issue is more developing a roster that sort of makes sense in all the different ways. And Major League Soccer's weird salary cap, gam and tam, that it makes sense. And for a guy that's given you, as you said, 5 goals, 7 assists last year, those are decent numbers for a guy who did play a lot of wing backs, some right wing, left wing, a few games at right back, and they sort of did a tactical thing where, he was right back, but they released him very quickly up the field, so he was sort of an attacking right back. Those are respectable numbers, right? They're not Gabriel Peck numbers. They're not numbers for somebody who's maybe commensurate with what he's making, and I think that's a lot of it. He's just a little bit older player who's making a lot of money. And I think just within the salary structure, they just needed to clear a little bit of room. And look, and I don't know the particulars here. And if he goes to Seattle, it wouldn't surprise me. If he stays in Dallas, it wouldn't surprise me. And I think everybody would be happy to have him here. One of the things I always think about Paul, and he's not a big guy, man. He's probably, he and Alan Velasco were the smallest guys in the field. But, I remember a game here. I'm pretty sure it was Jackson Reagan. He goes and I don't know how, but he hits Reagan pretty hard, and he gets a yellow card for it. And literally Reagan's got to be twice his size, and later, Jackson's, he's a physical defender, and he had gotten into it a little bit with Jesus Ferreira, and I sort of asked Paul something about it. I was talking to him a couple of days later, and he's like, I'm not going to let Jackson Reagan do that to my guys. I took my yellow card. I was happy to. Oh, I know what it was. I think it was like his 5th yellow card, and he had to sit out. And I said, "Are you kind of?" He's like, "No, because I'm not letting Jackson Reagan do that to my teammates." And that's what you want, right?
Yeah. In fact, the
and,
Sounders have talked a lot about needing that last year, actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you got some of those guys with the roll down brothers, et cetera. But look, you can always use more. And he is a guy that he was the team captain, and honestly, there were some yellow cards that he took that that I kind of wish he wouldn't have. I think he needs to be smart about it. But sometimes, again, that's what I think that was the conversation we were having. It's like, sometimes, yeah, you're right. But he says, but sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. And you like that in a guy. And again, like 5 goals, 7 assists for a team that wasn't very good last year. If we're honest, that's not bad. And he can't play a bunch of different positions. By the way, he really loves playing on the left, so he can cut in on his right foot. That's
interesting.
If he had his druthers, that's where he'd be playing, probably left wing.
Oh, interesting. Well, Steve, this has been super illuminating and really satisfying to have this conversation. I'm glad we finally got to talk. We have not to bore people with our history, but you and I were working together as far back as 2010, which is a long time, especially in this world of ours. But it's been great seeing everything that you're doing, and I'm glad to see you having the success that you're having, and I really appreciate you doing this with me. So thanks, Steve. Anything else you want to plug?
I'll plug Sounded Heart because back at you, man. I've told Dave Clark this way back in the day that is one of the many hats I've worn over the years in media and soccer media. As SB Nation manager, I've said that was the first blog that I brought into the SB Nation fold, and I said if I'd stopped right there, it'd have been a success because you guys do such a great job up there with really and my little one of my little cheat codes. When I've got to get ready for Seattle, my first for a broadcast, my first stop is Sounded Heart.
Oh, well, that's extremely nice of you to say and really satisfying to hear. And I'm sure Dave will love the shout out as well. But thank you so much for doing this, Steve. It was great having you. Best of luck going forward, and hopefully we get to hear you on the radio this year. And hopefully we can get radio broadcast for both teams on every broadcast. That should be the biggest goal on MLS Season Pass. I'm going to start that campaign right now. So,
I'm with you. Sign me up, man. I love it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm Jeremiah Oshan. This is Nos Adietes, and we'll catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one.